So, my friends, welcome. Welcome. It is lovely to be here with you and microdosing psilocybin in this masterclass. Today, we're just going to focus on psilocybin because so many people in the community really wanted to get some insight on how to have a conscious relationship with the holy children, as they're often referred to in Mexico. So you're in the right place if you signed up for this masterclass that is all about microdosing psychedelics for well-being and spiritual growth. There's certainly been, over the last several years, a significant increase in the interest in microdosing for really a whole range of different issues and well-being. I've written about how in women's health, microdosing has been a focal point in the conversation because I have found that microdosing may offer some unique benefits for the specific challenges that women face. But today we're going to explore the potential of microdosing for well-being and spiritual growth, but it'll certainly apply to men and women, right? Um, One of the things that I think it's helpful is to also share a little bit about why and how microdosing psychedelics got on my personal radar as a potential support for my clients and for women. But first and foremost, what is microdosing? You probably already know, but microdosing is defined as taking a fraction of a typical therapeutic or recreational dose of a psychedelic substance. Now, the dose is usually small enough to not cause any hallucinogenic effects, but that small dose can still provide potential benefits for mental and physical well-being. Now, we emphasize the non-hallucinogenic part because some people used to say sub-perceptual. But many of us know when we are taking a microdose, we actually will perceive changes, whether that's in our mood or our creativity or our ability to focus. And so rather than saying sub-perceptual, we're now shifting to saying sub-hallucinogenic. So if we start to think through the different substances that one might potentially consider, psilocybin always comes high on the list. Psilocybin comes from psilocybe mushrooms. There are hundreds of species of mushrooms that contain psilocybin, and how wonderful, right? They're in nature. And so if we're talking about a microdose of psilocybin, this is typically ranging from 0.1 to 0.3 grams. Some people may even go up to 0.5 grams. If we're looking at the equivalent of pure psilocybin, which unless you're working in a research lab, you probably don't have access to it, we're talking 5 to 10 milligrams of pure psilocybin. So if you think about this, that's 100 or up to 500 milligrams that would be considered a typical microdose of psilocybin mushrooms. And people are taking them in mushroom form. They can be ground up into a fine powder and put into capsules. If you're on this side of the pond, I'm in France. So in Holland, people are also microdosing psilocybin truffles, which you would need to probably take a little bit more than a mushroom because mushrooms have a higher concentration of psilocybin. So many people report when they're microdosing psilocybin that they have an enhanced creativity. A lot of people will say that they have a better mood and an increased sense of focus, which is pretty great. And if you've ever heard Paul Stamets talk about it, he says that psilocybin mushrooms make people nicer. So what are some of the symptoms that we might see that people complain about that they think microdosing might help? So right off the bat is mood regulation. I definitely found that with my own microdosing journey, microdosing psilocybin does impact my mood. It makes things just a little bit brighter and a little less heavy. But there is also anecdotal and preliminary evidence that suggests that low doses of psychedelics may actually have analgesic properties. So, in addition to maybe helping with mood or reducing anxiety, how cool is it that you might be able to have a reduction in pain? If they do have these slight analgesic properties, that could significantly help people who have, whether it's menstrual pain or fibromyalgia or other things. So it's one thing to keep in mind, but again, I'll continue to share some other research findings that may back this up. Some other people find that the cognitive difficulties that you might find, that microdosing has actually been reported to help with that. Whether that's brain fog due to menopause, due to ADHD, due to sleep deprivation, microdosing has been reported to help with focus, problem solving, and enhanced creativity. And so you can imagine that for any of us who are around menopause, or if you get brain fog associated with your menstrual periods, this could potentially help. So if we look at a couple of studies that stand out, I can't cover everything, but in this study by Prokaskova and company, they conducted a study to explore the effects of microdosing. And so in her study, they looked specifically at microdosing and creativity. This was an open-labeled natural setting, so they looked at participants who had already planned to microdose with psychedelics. It's important to know. And they had the participants complete a series of tests that were assessing their creative thinking and their problem-solving abilities. And they even kind of focused on their general cognitive function before and after microdosing. And so the results revealed that microdosing led to increased convergent and divergent thinking, which are key aspects of creativity, according to the research. And so this study suggests that microdosing psychedelics could have potential benefits in enhancing creativity and problem-solving skills. Now, of course, this study, it was conducted in an open-label natural setting, which of course may introduce bias, and that could limit the generalizability of these findings. But I do think it's worth noting all the same. There was also another study by James Fadiman and Sophia Korb. You've probably heard of James Fadiman. He's considered sort of the grandfather of microdosing. He's the author of the Psychedelic Explorer's Guide and Your Symphony of Selves. Well, in this study, they were looking at potential benefits. In their research, they collected self-reported data, so once again, self-reports, from people who were already microdosing around the world. They examined the effects of all the substances that they took on mood, cognition, and overall well-being. And in their study, they found that many of the participants reported that they did see an improvement in their mood. They also noted improvement in focus and well-being and creativity with really minimal side effects. And of course, we do know that the study has been acknowledged for its limitations based on it being self-reported data. And we do need to have more rigorous controlled research to validate the findings. But when you look at the people who have reported, even in other studies, and they're saying, when I microdose, my menstrual periods are easier and better. I think it's worth taking note, and perhaps we'll have more studies to explore this further. So this is a good one to keep in mind. And next up is a study by Petter Jonstad. In his study in 2018, this one was an interview-based exploration of the experience that individuals who engaged in psychedelic microdosing had. And they really wanted to understand the motivations, the perceived benefits, and the potential risks. So the people in his study reported having a range of positive outcomes, once again, including enhanced mood, increased creativity, improved problem-solving abilities, and they even said that they had better emotional processing. Now, it's important to note that some people did report drawbacks. Some people reported having increased anxiety and or psychological discomfort. So once again, this is a study that highlights the need for more controlled research to really understand the effects and the safety of microdosing. But I think it's pretty interesting, right? So that's a little bit about the Jonstad study. So now let's explore the potential mechanisms of action. What is it that psychedelics are actually doing that might be helping out? Well, we're going to look at a few things, starting off with, we always go there, serotonin receptors. So you may already know that serotonin is a neurotransmitter. It plays a crucial role in our mood regulation, in pain perception, as well as our cognitive functioning. We know that of all the psychedelics like LSD, mescaline, and psilocybin, they all interact with multiple serotonin receptors. But we think that their main effects have to do with the 5-HT2A receptor. And this may explain why people are experiencing less pain during their periods, better cognitive function, and better moods. And also neuroplasticity. And this is one thing that we talk about a lot with macro doses or large doses, but we wonder if neuroplasticity might also be implicated with microdosing. So, neuroplasticity is known as the lifelong ability of the brain to adapt, to reorganize neural connections, and even grow new connections. And research shows that with macro doses or large doses of psychedelics, including LSD, psilocybin, and ayahuasca, there's a window of neuroplasticity that opens up. And what we see when we look at increased neural flexibility, we're thinking that that may be what contributes to the improvements that we see in mood, cognition, and overall well-being. And one of the interesting things to note here is one of the aspects of neuroplasticity with psychedelics is an increase in something called brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF. And the thing for me that was really striking was when I realized that estradiol, which is what some women will be put on if they take hormone replacement therapy for menopause, estradiol also leads to an increase in BDNF. And so one of the questions I've had in my own case, I discovered microdosing for myself as the pandemic hit in 2020. I was entering into menopause. I basically wanted to try microdosing for creativity. And I realized that many of the symptoms that I should have had because of menopause, I actually didn't have. So my doctor did at the time put me on hormone replacement therapy. But the question for me has always been, have I been getting like a double benefit of being on estrogen and progesterone along with the neuroplasticity benefits we get with microdosing? Don't know. We need to test that out, but it's worth noting. The other aspect that we see with microdosing is brain connectivity. So psychedelics do temporarily alter the connectivity patterns within the brain. So there's parts of the brain that don't normally talk to each other. And with psychedelics, they actually do start making these connections. And it's that increased communication between these different brain regions that may underlie the enhancements in creativity, in problem solving, and emotional processing. So we shall see. There's also the potential for anti-inflammatory effects. There's emerging evidence that suggests that some psychedelics can have these anti-inflammatory properties, which is wonderful because we actually know that inflammation has been linked to several mood disorders. It's also been linked to pain, and inflammation has been linked to cognitive decline, even Alzheimer's dementia. So these anti-inflammatory effects could potentially contribute to some of the benefits that we see with microdosing. Now, of course, all of these mechanisms of action are not fully understood. They're being tested, but and we know that most of the data is coming from larger doses. So there's going to have to be more research to really clarify and explore the potential benefits. But I do think there's a pretty good case for it, and there's anecdotal evidence that they're beneficial. And next up is hormonal regulation. To be honest, there's really limited evidence on the effects of microdosing psychedelics for hormone regulation. But when we consider that they do have the potential to enhance mood and reduce anxiety, that could indirectly influence hormone health. Once again, we need further research in the area to really see if there is a connection, but it's something worth considering, especially because our hormones are definitely impacted by stress, which is our next topic. One of the ways that psychedelics may improve well-being is by reducing stress. And since stress can exacerbate menstrual or menopausal problems, that potential stress-reducing effect may be part of why they are so effective for many women. So there are a lot of different mechanisms that we're seeing. It's not just the molecule of psilocin. Psilocybin gets turned into psilocin, which crosses the blood-brain barrier and has a whole host of effects. But I do think it'll be really interesting to see what research shows over the next decade or so. So, of course, we have to talk about safety, understanding the risks and precautions. Now, as you've seen in a few of these studies I've mentioned, there haven't been a lot of side effects, but there has been an increased risk of anxiety and physiological discomfort. It appears to be dose dependent. So taking a microdose, which once again should be sub-hallucinogenic, it might work just fine for folks. But if you try to increase that dose, that's when some people will see anxiety crop up. So I can't stress this enough. You really have to titrate your dose. Even though you might hear that someone else could take 500 milligrams and go walking around a museum, if you're super sensitive, that may not be the case for you. And so before you just say, oh, I can't do it or it doesn't work, you need to back down to like the lowest dose possible. Now, of course, we have to talk about some of the potential risks. If you have a history of mania, bipolar 2, schizophrenia in you or in the family, you would definitely want to use these with caution, if at all. So it's really important to gather information about your family history, about what medications you're on and what conditions that you have, because these are things you'd want to talk over with a psychedelic-informed therapist, doctor, or coach. And especially because we don't know the long-term effects and interactions with other medications. We know what it is for large doses, but we don't have as much data on smaller doses. Now, there is this thought that maybe taking small doses could impact heart valves. And so this is another one of those things to be mindful of. So if we talk about the general precautions, we generally say to start with the lowest possible dose. There's a saying in the psychedelic world, you'll see it on a slide here in a minute, be like a turtle. You need to start low and go slow. And you really, if you're starting out, you want to avoid doing this on a day when you really need to be super sharp if it's your first time, if you're just figuring out your response. You don't want this to be a day where you need to be operating machinery or driving until you find out how sensitive you are. So if you get a package and it says to start at 0.4, well, usually the range is like 0.1 to 0.4, don't start at the highest. It's best to start low, and then you can adjust. So avoiding those situations where you might need, to use all of your faculties. There you go. So speaking with a psychedelic informed professional can definitely help you. And I'm available for consultation if that resonates with you. So here are some of the guidelines for a safe and effective microdosing journey. As I said, the good old turtle here reminds us to start low and go slow. It really is one of those things that you don't want to have a bad reaction and then have to blame it on the microdose. So it's best if you just start low, go slow. You don't need to get up to some magical dose just because you've heard someone else was on it. Each of us has a different brain response, different tolerances. So that's going to be very, very important. We have talked about some of the potential side effects. Triggering mental health issues is one of them. And so definitely be mindful of that. So how are you going to choose your dosing protocol? Well, James Fadiman created a protocol, and I have to stress this. The protocol is a starting point. You're not meant to necessarily stay on it forever. You figure out your dose and what works for you. You don't have to be rigidly locked in to any protocol. So it's not like it's written in stone. But in the Fadiman protocol, it is 1 day on and then 2 days off. And I highly recommend that all the while you are tracking the effects over time to really see what is the right dose for you. Do you need it several days or not? You may not. But if you maintain a consistent routine and assess over time, when you look back over your notes and your symptoms, and you'll be able to see what worked best for you. The Stamets protocol. Maybe you've heard of this one as well. This is typically where you're going to go for 4 days in a row, 4 or 5, and then take 2 to 3 days off. Now remember, it's the same deal here. You want to maintain a consistent routine. You want to continue to check in on the effects over time to see where you land. For me, I remember starting off with 1 day on and 2 days off. When I got to my second month, I decided to try 3 or 4 days in a row. And now I've found my sweet spot. It'll vary from person to person. So just be aware. One of the other things that we recommend is that you also set intentions. Now, you really do have the power to influence your microdosing journey. It's not like you just take something and let it go. It's important that you actually set and focus on specific goals. So if we're talking about your health, what areas of your health do you want to improve? If you're talking about managing particular symptoms, really set your intention. I recommend that you journal. I always recommend that people get journals dedicated to this journey so you can always go back and look and track what is happening in your experience. A lot of people will say, oh, I don't really feel anything, and you're just going about your life. And then when you look back on your journal and you reflect back on the month, you might realize, wow, actually I was less edgy. One of the things that I noticed for me was equanimity. I just noticed that the things that would normally irritate me don't irritate me as much when I'm microdosing. So track your energy, your mood, your sleep. If you happen to join us for our Mindful Microdosing Group program, I've got a tracker with all these sorts of things that you're going to want to write down. You'll ask yourself, reflect, did you notice that if you took your microdose with caffeine, did you feel any different? Did you take it during a certain time of day? All of those things are what you want to be monitoring and adjusting. Some people find it's best to take their microdose in the morning because then they're sharp. Other people say, depending on the strain, it might make them sleepy. So maybe you're going to take your microdose at night. But the only way you could find out is if you actually track it and adjust these things as you need it. When you write these things down, it can really help you identify patterns so that you can optimize your regimen. So you may have already guessed, with me being an integrative physician, I'm always looking for the holistic approach. And I don't really imagine that microdosing psychedelics is going to completely erase or replace other things that you're doing for your well-being. But it really should be considered as part of an integrative or holistic approach. And that includes if you're already on some medications or HRT, you should still continue to manage your diet, get regular exercise and activity, and keep practicing all of your stress management techniques, whether that's journaling, writing, meditating, breath work and yoga, just being in nature, getting your hands dirty in the garden, and even being social. Some people find that microdosing is like a social lubricant. It takes away social anxiety. We do know that many of these substances increase empathy. They're known to improve relationships. So it's helpful to keep all of these things in mind. The other thing is community support. I highly encourage you to seek out and engage with communities of like-minded people. There are going to be other people who are just not into what you're into. It's ideal if you have some people with whom you can share your experiences, hear what other people are doing, get support through your journey. You can find online forums. Some people have even found local meetups, particularly in the United States. There are places where psilocybin mushrooms are decriminalized. So people can actually have meetups and swap mushrooms and these sorts of things. If you aren't already on the list, you might know that I host Sacred Psychedelic Saturday. It's on the first Saturday of every month. We meet at 9 a.m. Pacific, 12 Eastern. That's 18 here in France. And so you can always join with us on that private Zoom. You can ask me questions. You could remain anonymous, but it's a great way for you to connect and get additional education. It's totally free, and I'm always adding in other free resources for people who are exploring psychedelics. So that is the extent of the presentation. I do want to let you know that in addition to Sacred Psychedelic Saturday, which is free, I am now hosting this conscious, mindful microdosing. It's a group coaching program, and we are starting next month. In this group coaching program, we'll meet on the first and third Saturdays of November, December, January. If you're watching this later, yes, we will keep the 3 months rolling, so you can join at any time. But for the kickoff, it's going to be a great opportunity to get questions answered and connect with the community. So you can start to get your questions ready for this session while I just tell you a little bit more about this mindful microdosing. So starting on November 2nd, we'll meet on Zoom right after Sacred Psychedelic Saturday. We have a journal and a tracker with all sorts of things that you can track. You can track the phases of the moon and other astrological elements, if that's your thing. But in all cases, energy, mood, sleep, irritability, and any other symptoms that you want to tracking. We'll meet twice each month, answer questions. You'll also get access to my guided meditations that go along with our psychedelic bundle. So if this is of interest, I welcome you into that lovely space. So what questions do you have? Will you need to eventually increase doses over time? So the thing to think about when we're talking about microdosing is there's different approaches. Ultimately, if you're doing it for the brain benefits, you will likely be on it for several weeks and then take a break. You'll have a washout period. It's not recommended that you stay on it 52 weeks out of the year consistently. So you might start low and increase a little bit on your dose after 2 or 3 days. You can keep increasing the dose until you get to a point where it's like, oh, I can definitely tell that was not a micro, and then come back down. But ideally, once you've figured out, those first 2 weeks are just you figuring out what works for your brain so that you're still functional. Once you've gotten to your dose and you know, okay, now I'm going to do it 2 days a week or 3 days a week or every other day. After you've been on that for about 6 weeks, I advise you to take 10 days off. Have a complete washout period so that you give your receptors a break. Now, we don't know that there's necessarily a lot of tolerance built up with psilocybin like other drugs and medications, but it's not a bad thing to just have a little washout period, because you'll also start to recognize what life is like when you come back down to your normal baseline, and you'll really appreciate it more when you get back on to once again be tracking those sorts of symptoms. So I find that for me, what happened is I tried to go up, got to a point where I was getting edgy, backed my dose back down, where I'm not even taking 100 milligrams. I'm taking way, way smaller amounts. But I noticed that if I take it 2 to 3 days a week, I get to a sort of steady state and I'm fine. I don't need higher doses. And most people won't need higher doses because you're not doing this generally to be knocked out of anything. And so if you do that washout period, you shouldn't need to keep increasing your dose based on tolerance. So I hope that answers your questions. And what are your thoughts about using SSRIs as well as microdosing? Well, we don't know. We don't have a lot of data. But the thing with selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors is we know that for most people, if they're on an SSRI and then they have a macro journey with psilocybin, they're generally going to need a higher dose of mushrooms or truffles to have the effect because of being on SSRIs. So there's not a contraindication. We don't think that you'd be taking enough of this psilocybin to have what we call serotonin syndrome. So it would probably be fine. And I'm happy to, chat with you if you need some insights on that. But in general, it doesn't look like there would be a risk. It may be that you need a higher dose if you're on SSRIs. All right, so next up is the question about what do we think about stacking? So the Stamets stack. So Paul Stamets, who I mentioned in this talk, he really believes in stacking. He uses lion's mane and some other adaptogens along with the flushing form of niacin. And his contention is the niacin dilates blood vessels, so it's increasing blood flow to the brain. We know that lion's mane and other mushrooms are adaptogens. They have anti-inflammatory. They have effects that improve cognition. So if you do that with psilocybin mushrooms, you're going to get super duper benefits. He's actually applying for a patent on the Stamets stack. I personally, that's what I do. In the morning, I have my green tea. I put in lion's mane. I've got some other adaptogens in pill form, ashwagandha and chaga and some things. And I take niacin as well. And I've been doing that, consistently. And I really feel like it's good. People say you're not supposed to feel anything when microdosing, yet I feel more energetic. Am I taking too much, or is this normal? I know a lot of people who get revved up, not to the point of being bouncing off the walls or, hyper, but I do know people who get a boost, whether that's a mood boost or an energy boost. And I would say the only way you'll know is if you're taking too much is if you have a negative side effect. So is that being energetic, does that bother you? If not, then it's fine. Some people, as I said, when you're titrating your dose, some people with underlying anxiety, and I don't have anxiety, but I know that if I take too much, I get edgy and I feel irritable and I feel, not good. So in that case, I would say, yeah, that's taking too much. But also note, if you do feel more energetic with taking a microdose, then that might mean you need to focus on taking it in the daytime and not at night so that you can get some good sleep. Next question, how long do you recommend waiting to do microdosing after a macro journey? I generally say 2 months would be ideal. I know some people out there in this world, they do it sooner, but it's nice because you give your brain the opportunity to benefit from the macro journey you've just had for 6 to 8 weeks before you start doing a low dose of psilocybin, for example. Next question, how quickly does the microdose usually kick in? I find that if you take too much, you might feel it instantly. And I've certainly felt that way, times where I thought I was only taking, 150 milligrams, and it's like, whoa, that doesn't feel like a microdose. And for me, besides that edginess, if I really get past the edginess and take too much, I can feel either sleepy. I mentioned to you guys before, equanimity. I can just be kind of like, oh, okay. I don't feel any pressure to work or do anything. It's not like apathy. It's just kind of like, yeah. So you might notice that the microdose, if it's on the higher end for your brain, you might notice it within 30 minutes if you take it on an empty stomach. So how long should one stay on a dose before increasing? I would go for a week or so, maybe 10 days. And after your washout period, maybe you're going to have like 2 or 3 days of a washout. And when you start again, you can see if you can increase it. And once you get too high, just back down, and that might be your dose for the next few weeks. Thoughts about macrodosing and ketamine-assisted therapy. Yeah, microdosing. Well, ketamine works on a very different receptor system in the brain. So you might consider that they have complementary effects, right? So it's kind of like, this is going to be a bad analogy, but it's like, should I take my vitamin C even though I'm eating an orange? Like they both, well, taking your vitamin C is probably going to give you more bioavailable vitamin C. That's great for many things in the body. Whereas eating an orange, also vitamin C, but you're getting the pulp, you're getting the fiber, you're getting other things, beta carotene. So they could be complementary. I haven't yet read or heard of any negative interactions. Would CBD oil have the same benefits? CBD oil would not have the same benefits as psilocybin, but it could have some of the relaxation. I don't know that it necessarily improves cognition or memory. You'd have to see what the ratio of all the various things in it, terpenes and cannabinoids. I'm not an expert in CBD, but I know that not all CBD is the same. It's like they have different properties. Any problems taking 80 milligrams of aspirin daily, not for heart problems, and microdosing? No, not at all. There's no interaction between aspirin and psilocybe containing truffles or mushrooms. I will say some people find that mushrooms can make their stomach feel icky. Now, if you're microdosing, probably you're taking such a small amount that it wouldn't affect your stomach. But if you take it with your morning tea or whatever you're drinking, that's fine. If aspirin doesn't upset your stomach or give you gastritis or ulcers, then you would be fine with that. All right, next question. Can you give more information on the starting dose and the way of administering? Yeah, so if you're in Holland, you would probably be getting a hold of truffles instead of mushroom powder. And so truffles are kind of these like chewy underground components of mushrooms. So I recommend that you get one of the little scales that can measure, down to 0.05 grams, because then you're going to measure out your little pinch of the truffles. In Holland, they also sell truffles in capsule form, and they're generally, I find when I've ordered from Holland, the pill forms was too much. It's like, it was a lot. So I will literally open it and just sprinkle a little bit into my tea. So the key here is to really start low. So you might start with 0.1 grams of a truffle. Take it in the morning. If you're taking truffles, you might chew it, so that you can really release all of the goodness in the truffles, rather than just trying to swallow it, because then you're leaving it for your body to do more of the work. You can just see if you're taking such a small dose, you should be able to take it on an empty stomach. Otherwise, you might need to take it after breakfast. And typically, that's how you would do it. You would take it with tea or water, fasting or not fasting, generally in the morning. Leaving yourself, like when you start this, remember, you're going to do this on a day when you don't have to be with clients or kids. You know, you can be with kids, but like, you don't want to have to like carry a baby or have to, take care of someone really fragile. I find that you're not going to be so out of it, but once you find your dose. But in the very beginning, like I mentioned to you, sometimes I found myself like feeling a little, not exactly woozy, but just sort of floating, which is not ideal if you had to drive somewhere. You definitely don't want to do that. So in the beginning, if weekends are lighter for you, I would say start on a weekend so that you can really track what happens to you when you take them. And then after that, you'll know. And again, if you're not taking it to be like super sharp or be creative, if you find that they make you sleepy, you can take them at night. So that's to be considered. How do you find reputable and organic suppliers? Well, in the United States, in Oregon and California, Washington, D.C., and Colorado, there are other places I'm sure that are also decriminalized. They're not controlled by the FDA in those decrim locations, but you can generally find them in cities where decrim has happened. You can reach out to me, and I'm happy to share with you a group out of Oregon. Oregon, of course, is also another place that has been, well, they're pulling back their laws on the decrim at the moment. But there's a really wonderful mycologist. Well, actually, there's a team of mycologists that I know and I trust, that I've had the opportunity to experience their microdoses. So I'm happy to give you information. Just send me a message and I'll share that privately. So what about strains? This is something that I can't stress enough. I'm always telling people, find out what strain of mushroom or truffle you're taking, because the potency differs from strain to strain. Now, if you're taking a minuscule amount, you could probably get away with doing something like penis envy. For some people, penis envy is a very strong strain, so you wouldn't want to go on a macro journey as a first timer with that. Golden teachers are nice. Liberty caps are nice. It's going to depend on your region. I also like the Hollandia mushrooms and truffles that you get in Holland. That's what we used in our most recent sessions in Holland. So that's another option for you. And as I said, you can reach out to me, and I'm happy to share a little bit of information for those of you who live in in the United States. I will say, buyer beware. This happens to be a group that I trust, and I use their products, but I'm not being a pusher here. Just need you to know that. One of the other questions that came in is like, are people going to know that I've microdosed? Well, if you take too much, yeah, like as I said in that beginning, it might be more obvious. If you are one of those people that gets energized or have a better mood, it might be obvious on the positive side, right? If you find that it makes you spacey and tired, then yeah, someone might notice. but they're not going to know what you've taken. They might just notice that you're acting differently. Of course, if you tell people, well, that's a whole other thing. I'm excited about this program where we've made it with 3 tiers of pricing. With all the time you spend with me and all of the goodies, the course is really valued at over $800, but we're offering it for this first time at $25 a month at the lowest rate, and that's what we call kind to you pricing. Kind to us is where we would make a little bit of money, and that's $40 a month. And Kindness Together, where you pay $60 a month for 3 months, allows us to support someone in need, meaning we could give a scholarship to someone who'd like to be in the Mindful Microdosing Group. So you'll see all of that information when you go to my website. Has this been helpful? Do you feel like you have a little more insight on what to do if you're considering microdosing? I think, when I look back over my own journey, start low, go slow. Just know that in the beginning, you're figuring it out. You're figuring out what your brain can tolerate. Now, I'm serious when I tell you I can only handle grains. If I take too much, I'm out of it. I'm just like, I don't feel like working. I don't even feel like being creative. It's just like I just want to lay there and just contemplate life. But once you find your dose, it can be really excellent. So give yourself grace in the beginning. Like if you do take too much, okay, then you just chill for a day. It's okay. You don't have to hang it up and say, oh my God, this is horrible, unless you have a really horrible reaction. But that's the other reason why we're doing this in this 3-month program, so that you can come, you can ask questions, you can get feedback. You don't have to be out there alone, and I can support you as you're doing the journey. Well, if you have more questions that come up, email me. First Saturday in November, we start our Mindful Microdosing Group. I'll be giving you additional information on microdosing, the journal, the prompts, and of course, community, which is such a big help when you're in this space. Sending you so many blessings and much love from the south of France, and I'll see you when I see you. All right? Take good care, everyone. Bye for now.